Strengthening the social dimension of ESG in oil and gas. This is going to be, we're going to hear from Dr. Isabel DiVanna, the Associate Director of the Carbon Trust. Isabel is an award-winning strategist and Associate Director in Climate Finance and Infrastructure at the Carbon Trust, with a track record of senior roles across leading organisations, including RenewableUK and Eunomia. She specialises in strategic revenue growth and sustainability-driven business development, with expertise spanning FMCG, legal med tech, engineering, and renewable energy. Holding an MBA, 2 PhDs, and multiple ESG and sustainability certifications, Isabel brings deep academic and professional insight. Beyond her career, she serves as Vice Chair of International House London, is a seasoned NED accredited coach, civil mediator, and mental health first aider. Please welcome Dr. Isabel DiVanna.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ashwati, for the invitation. I broke my ankle some months ago and I had my pins removed a few weeks back. So if I can't stand and I sit down, don't worry. You know, it's all going to be fine. I just might have to sit down for a moment. As Alana, not yet. I'm going to try my best here. But as Alana mentioned, the just transition is a super important topic here. And although Ashwati asked me to talk about the social dimension in ESG in oil and gas, I'd like to talk about that as well. So if that's all right, we're going to talk about that. Now, I need to keep you guys awake because you're eating, but also, you know, the evening's going on. So does anybody know how many people are employed by oil and gas? No? Oh, we have a winner here. Who? How many? How many people are employed by oil and gas? Globally, 11.8 million people. If you actually take the indirect supply chain of oil and gas, we're talking about 68 million people. Now, I'm all for renewables. I used to be executive director of Renewable UK, but we have to make sure that the transition here is just. Okay, we can't just look at oil and gas and say, okay, well, you have to change your business, guys. You know, just do something else. That's not going to work. Okay, so what I want to talk a little bit is about how and what oil and gas companies are doing to enact this just transition in their businesses. Okay. It's not oil and gas only as well. I mean, there are other companies that also need to be focusing on that, like mining, like coal, like heavy industries. So this is something that is happening across to enable us to get to net zero across a transition that is just, okay? Now, for oil and gas, one of the biggest challenges that they have, of course, is that they have to bring in new talent. Oil and gas has, anybody have any idea percentage of women working in oil and gas? Bit more. 23%. That's really low. In renewables, what's the percentage actually? 13. Okay, so we have a big problem here. Okay, we need to bring diversity into it. And I'm not even talking about other global majority figures here. We're just talking about diversity. So we need to bring in diverse talent. We need to adapt them to new technologies like renewables. Okay, we need to embed that equity and inclusion in everything that is done, from reskilling strategies to all of the other inclusion practices in companies and policies, to make sure that no group is left behind. All right. More importantly, oil and gas companies, they tend not to be everybody's favorites. And as our colleague Pramat has talked about, sustainable finance is really important. Financing is moving away to some extent from oil and gas. So they need to get the narrative right so they can maximize and leverage ESG. Because like I said, we still need them to be in business. We need the workforce to be employed. We just need them to be transitioning, okay? So oil and gas companies like mining, like coal, are very often part of interconnected communities, okay? And in these interconnected communities, there's potential for huge fragmentation. So one of the most important things they need to do is collaborate, okay? And that's collaborate between them, but also collaborate by pooling resources with others that are in the community to address these long-term systemic challenges, okay? I think these solutions need to be dictated by local context. Again, this is not just like a one solution fits all, one size fits all for everybody. They need to be focusing on community needs. They need to be focusing on local environment. They need to be focusing on climate conditions. it's also about balancing the strategies and the co-benefits that can be derived. Because in the end of the day, these companies are businesses. They are in business, and they need to also still be taking care of their fiduciary duties and their duties to shareholders as they transition, okay? Now, according to financial analysis, oil and gas majors are investing. Anybody want to guess how much are they investing on the S of ESG today? How much of their profits? What percentage? Ooh, I wish. We wish.
10.
2.
5%. But that depends. Shell has invested about 7.3% according to last year's figures, but BP, anybody here work at BP? Thank God. Okay, so only 2%. All right. So it varies greatly. So some companies are spending quite a lot more than others. Okay. Now, to prioritize the social, they need to take this percentage of their profit and do a number of things. And I'm going to suggest what some of them are doing really well. I might name a couple of them. I didn't know if there would be oil and gas in the room, and I didn't want to seem like I was favoring anyone. So first of all, they have to think about their holistic responsibility, okay? They need to consider the long-term social outcomes, not just the transition, but equality and diversity, cross-skilling, transitioning to new technologies, for example, renewables. When it comes to employee welfare and safety, which is super, super important, there are many potential hazards and dangers to those who actually work in oil and gas. They need to look at occupational health and safety, and I'm sure some of you in this room will be doing quite a lot of exciting things in this area, but ensuring worker safety is absolutely critical, okay? This is really important, especially as they're transitioning, because if they're transitioning to renewables, they really need to be upskilled, cross-skilled, trans-skilled, pass-supported in very safely so that they understand what they're doing in these new technologies. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is key. You know, companies setting goals to increase representation of underrepresented groups do better, okay? There's plenty of research. EY has done the research. McKinsey has shown that companies that actually focus on equality and diversity perform 23-25% better, okay? And in renewables, as well as in oil and gas, is the priority. Employee engagement is extremely important. So anything that isn't tokenistic, anything that engages employees and helps them understand what is it that they need from their employers and from that transition is absolutely key. Trade union engagement is vital. Again, you can't achieve everything without the local community engagement, but also the engagement of those who are, you know, working with the workforce to make sure that they are getting what they need. And obviously planning for workforce resilience very often includes training, as we've talked about, and as Alana talked about, but also internal mobility programs, mentoring, lifelong learning. So there's really a comprehensive internal program to engage with that. Okay, especially as automation and digitalization and restructuring reshape work, fairness and transparency in the workforce planning becomes absolutely key. Okay, somebody save me a plate, hey? They're coming back here, so make sure I still have some food. I'm hungry. Just make you guys laugh. Come on, give me a bone here. Now, when it comes to community engagement, this is really, really important. And oil and gas companies have actually been doing this for decades. So this is not new, but the way they've been doing this has changed a bit. So they've very often invested in local community projects. Very often these were tokenistic. They were small investments on very limited capacities, small bits of funding here and there. They didn't really look at the direct co-benefits of that. And more importantly, they didn't really look at the creation of shared value. Okay, the long-term CSR initiatives that we should be looking at, now they look at those. And that's everything from building education and healthcare and building environmental initiatives. For example, Jose will have been talking about some of those. Electrification. So we have cases of Chevron, for example, doing quite a lot in Southern Africa, Shell doing quite a lot in Southeast Asia, just looking at how to embed long-term strategies into communities so that these are not, again, tokenistic efforts of limited impact, okay? And continuing a social dialogue, open and continuous with local communities because their needs are evolving. And oil and gas companies need to understand that and be above and over and above those, okay? So the idea is that the ultimate success factor is that communities, workforce, individuals are feeling empowered, whereas they've often felt disempowered. And that, again, is central to the just transition, okay? Final point here is, as Francesca was talking about, is the human rights and the supply chain. Okay, oil and gas supply chain is huge. Companies are working, of course, very hard on ensuring that human rights are respected throughout the supply chain, and so too are oil and gas. As Cameron talked about, and you all know to some extent ESG regulation and legislation, we have CSDDD, we have Germany with their own Supply Chain Act, we have UK with Modern Slavery, and we have California with Transparent Supply Chains Act. All of these are binding, and depending on how they are interpreted in the different contexts, they can be binding on your direct supply chain, but also the indirect supply chain. So it just gets incredibly big. And as Francesca says, nobody knows where these are, and you can't impact them directly, okay? Now, obviously, as they do all of that, there's something in it for oil and gas, because these are businesses, and they also need to derive their benefits. And first of all, is getting their continuing social license to operate, okay? If they don't have that, they will not be able to transition, they will also not be able to operate, all right? They will also be financially sustainable. Of course, right now, investment is actually moving at a ratio. Does anybody know what's investment in oil and gas versus renewables ratio, according to in the past decade? Does anybody know how much money has been going to renewables versus oil and gas? What's the ratio? 28, yeah, a little bit like that. It's significant, but it's still a $3.3 trillion industry, the energy industry, and oil and gas is still $1.1 trillion industry, okay? So it's quite a lot of money. It's not what I have in my retirement fund. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of our pensions are actually tied up to that, okay? So that investor confidence, as Pranav was talking about, is really, really important, and that's what oil and gas companies are getting out of that, okay? Reputational management, of course, especially building trust, as there's been many issues over the years when it comes to oil and gas, and the diversification itself, because if you believe, as many of us believe, that the resources of fossil fuels are finite and that this is leading to, increased GHG emissions and increased warming of our planet, then they have to diversify. So those that are actually transitioning using CCUS, using renewables, using floating offshore wind, all of the technologies that are available are going to be doing very well. Okay, so this isn't something that, in summary, all I wanted to say is that getting the S in ESG right is critical. Okay, this is not about balancing profit and purpose. This is not for hippie tree huggers like myself who work at the Carbon Trust. This is actually about aligning profit and purpose, which is the point of ESG, and it is what we need to be doing. And I actually think this is really exciting, and I can't wait to see what oil and gas companies come to next. Thank you very much.